up in recent years over the impact of Yukon development on the quality of life in town. The Mansfield Neighborhood Preservation Group was created about a year and a half ago to provide Facebook dialogues for people who were trying to share information and get coverage of their concerns when local media was very limited. So we started that series. We've done a few shows on TV here on the home front. We've done some radio interviews on WECS, and we've done some articles in Neighbors. And we're going to try to use this series throughout the year, each week, or each month, I should say, to give dialogue for people to share information to help you understand the context and the history of the relationship between the university and the town and the people of Mansfield. It's a good example of the success and growth of an institution and accountability and transparency and how it affects everybody around it. So we have two people today to launch our first show of the second season, and I'm really happy they're here in the studio to help us out. We're going to kind of paint a broader picture without lots of details so you understand the different areas that we're going to be looking at over the next several months. They're both longtime residents of Mansfield for many years. They've had a great deal of knowledge and experience, so they're very qualified to be here to share this program today. First off, I'll introduce Richard Sherman. I've had him on the program before over the years once in a while, but he's very involved with the town. He is an architectural designer and a construction manager, and we're happy to have you here, Richard.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Also, we have Charles Vidic with us. He's president of Charles Vidic Associates. He's published some wonderful research papers on a blog that are available to you that I'll talk about in a few minutes that will give you a great deal of research onto the long-term history of Yukon and the changes that have happened over the years. So I want to thank you both again for being here. And maybe, Charlie, you could start out briefly with your history of the town and how you got involved in this effort. And we'll have Richard do the same thing about how you became involved in the issue. And then we'll talk about kind of setting the stage for the rest of the year. Okay?
Okay. Well, I guess talking about the history of the town, of course, goes much further back than the university. 1702, 1703, that period is when the town was founded. But the University of Connecticut, which was really an agricultural school, started in 1881. So the history of the university and the town-gown relationships from 1881 to the present. And that relationship has changed over time dramatically from being a school of agriculture with a very limited number of students to today being an international institution with recognition of this school around the world because of its many athletic achievements being one of the main reasons why it's gotten so much attention. So the history I'll go into in much further detail,
sure,
but it is one that shows a changing dialogue between the town of Mansfield and the University of Connecticut. It was in perhaps a David and Goliath story, which we'll get into in a little bit further.
Yeah, okay. And so, Richard, how did you get involved in the dialogues about Yukon and Mansfield relationships?
Well, kind of indirectly. I was in architecture school 25 years ago. I got a call from a local resident who was worried about a mixed-use development in what at one time was considered a potential green for Mansfield, which is right off Bassett's Bridge Road. And it just so happened that there was a very important recharge aquifer underneath this particular proposed development. I gave some architectural testimony, and what I discovered in the process of getting ready for the presentation was that this seemed to be a issue greater than just simply this development. It had to do with the Department of Transportation. There was some talk about widening 195 to 4 lanes, putting it on the national highway system. There was also some talk of, well, it was 30 years, the idea of a cross-country expressway to increase the ability of people to get from who knows where to who knows where. But the argument was also that the university really needed to be able to more effectively move masses of automobiles in and out. And then as I got more involved in the town, I discovered that there were issues that were more directly related to Yukon. It's almost 20 years ago this fall when President Austin became president, succeeding Harry Hartley.
Right.
All of a sudden, we had 3 proposals for 3 football stadiums that seemed to drop out of nowhere. It was done with incredible amounts of secrecy. I actually was at a I guess they said it technically was not a hearing because there was no noticing requirements that were given out, but there were 5 legislators, and they were getting input, and all the people who were scheduled to speak to give input were members of the administration and the coaching staff. Then came the chemical pits, the landfill. Then came Pfizer, and a bunch of us got to the point of asking some more generic, universal questions, and those questions still haven't been answered satisfactorily today, and that's one of the reasons why I and many other people see this as more than just a local issue. The nature of the university, its behavior, what it should be, what it is.
Right. And that's kind of where these programs started. Was about a year and a half ago, I found that there was a group of people in town that started the Mansfield Neighborhood Preservation Group, MNPG. And part of that was because it was hard for them to get local coverage in the media because it was limited for all kinds of reasons. Town council meetings are platforms for expressing opinions, but there's not lots of open dialogue back and forth at those meetings because of their agendas and how much time they have to manage each time they meet. So there's a vacuum. And so we started this series of programs to provide an open space that was accessible and open for people to share information to help everybody get a better understanding of the big picture and not the emotions of any one issue. In the last year or so, of course, housing has been a hot-button issue. There's been an issue of students that can't find housing on campus moving into the community neighborhoods, and some of that causes behavior issues and challenges, and we've talked about those before, and they'll come up again later in future shows. What we're doing for this first show is kind of giving you a map, kind of a layout of where we're going to go. And I want to mention something very helpful to you. I write a column in Neighbors, a wonderful local publication. And in the current issue for September, I had an article about this series, and it includes links to some wonderful research that Charlie has done that is very helpful to help you really get a history and a context. One of them is called A Chronology of Laws That Transformed Yukon from a Rural Agricultural School to an International Business Machine. That's one major piece of research. Another piece on his blog is Yukon's decade-long housing and environmental crises, their impacts on Mansfield, a chronology of key events. Each one of those is loaded with so much information we can't do it in one episode, so we're going to use this one to introduce these. I invite you to go to Neighbors. It's online, neighborspaper.com. And the issues are online, and you can get them anytime. You don't have to find a hard copy, although they're all over town. If you don't find one, just go to the web, neighborspaper.com. It's a great publication. But maybe you can talk about these 2 blogs and why you did all the work to try to put this in one package.
Well, the reason I put these together was that there is really a vacuum on information about the complete picture of what's going on in Mansfield with respect to its relationship to the University of Connecticut. And what I've seen is a failure to see the details. You've heard of the theory, follow the money and you'll see what the issues are. Well, I think there's something to that, but there's another theory, follow the legislation, because behind legislation is power and influence and money. And when you look at that, and I've gone through the legislation for the University of Connecticut from 1881 onwards, you find some very powerful legislation that has come in, and you see a university that has far more power than any of the most elite schools in our nation. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, those are all private schools. None of them have the power of government or the power of sovereign immunity, where you can actually come in and take property and do as you wish, or even to put your developments in zones without the approval of local government, or to have water company land and do it without respect to any of the laws that anyone else would have to apply to. How is that possible? Well, it's possible if you have such influence over the state legislature that you make those laws so that they exempt you from the requirements that any other private business would have. If Harvard were actually located in Mansfield, it would be subject to all the laws of zoning, environmental, and any of the other laws that corporations are subject to. UConn is not in that situation. They are exempted from these things, and so you have a unique situation which a university has far more power than any other university in the state of Connecticut. And not only that, but it has been given this power by the state legislature. And they've created an international business machine which has no checks, no local checks. And in fact, it's even at the state level, very limited state checks on what the university does. They've created almost an independent Frankenstein, which has no controls. And this is the thing that people don't realize. Harvard, if it were located in Mansfield, would be subject to all the local regulations.
Right.
But in the case of the University of Connecticut, it's not subject to those regulations. So this is a major issue in terms of transparency, because the Board of Trustees of the University of Connecticut are not voted into office by anyone locally. Almost all of the positions on the Board of Trustees are appointed by the governor, which makes the university highly political in the sense that the agenda of the university is strongly driven by the agenda of the governor. Mm-hmm. And that connection creates very significant issues for the residents of Mansfield in terms of being able to be heard.
Right.
That's one of the big issues.
And that's why we're starting this series for the second year, and we're going to do this once a month with other guests from town to have a variety of viewpoints. Later in the season, we'll invite President Herbst and a couple of members of the trustees to join us to address some of the points that we're going to be making, to have them share their thoughts so we can include everybody, not just residents, but people from the school, because it's about being accessible for everybody. And my question is, with the time that we have for this first episode, we're just trying to show you our goals and our layout for the series. These will be posted. They'll be available online, so people that aren't watching us now can get the shows later. What do you think would be the one thing the university could do that would be the most helpful to heal and restore a stronger relationship between the town and the government? What's the one thing they could do that would be the best thing, do you think?
Probably remove the present administration, reconstitute the Board of Trustees, and get a new governor.
Well, that's a larger scale.
It is, because that's the scale of the problem, and I don't think that you can do it piecemeal, because as Charlie had indicated, over decades, the university has evolved. The thinking. They refer, my experiences with various members of the administration, they would refer to students as customers. They're selling a product. They've incorporated the language of corporations in business. Many of the people involved running the university are not academics. Not that academics can't make mistakes,
right,
but essentially their worldview is different than people that run corporations. So I don't mean to be flippant about answering your question, but I try to drive home the magnitude of the problem.
Of the scale.
And if I may say,
Yes.
Richard has hit a very important point. I have not posted the latest blog that I put out. I put out one today on the landfill history of the University of Connecticut, but another one I'll wait another week, and that has to do with what are the changes that are needed. And one of them is exactly that. The Board of Trustees needs to be accountable to the communities in which the Board of Trustees is located, which is Mansfield. So if I were doing something, I would have a majority of the representation on the board accountable to the communities in which it's located. Since it's located in more than one town, Stamford and other locations, that would be one of the things that should be there. So that's one element. Board of Trustees is right at the top of the issue. The other one is the decentralization of the university, because the decentralization of the university has a lot to do with the issue of sustainability. When you put an urban population in a rural location, which has really limited infrastructure, has very, I guess you could say, ecologically sensitive watersheds and streams, you're creating an atmosphere, ecologically speaking, which is going to lead to significant adverse consequences to the area, particularly the watersheds, which the university and the town rely upon. So decentralization, allowing people to go to Stanford, emphasizing that, as opposed to creating an enormous institution in a highly rural, fragile environment. So those are two things that I'd say, and there are a few others that actually
Yeah.
I'll be posting on, but those two I would say are right at the top. The Board of Trustees and the issue of what you do with the Board of Trustees, which is decentralization.
Just like to add very quickly.
Please.
In a sense, it's a 19th century concept as opposed to a 21st century concept. We understand finite resources. We understand the idea of how expensive the use of power is, moving millions of gallons of waters. There is, with the technological abilities that exist today, there's no reason why a major entity like a university cannot be decentralized. And the university prides itself on cutting edge stuff. Well, in terms of planning, city planning, town planning, they are retrograde as opposed to au courant or even forward looking.
Okay. Well, one of our challenges here is for each episode, we're touching such a large topic, we're trying to manage it in pieces. So today it was kind of an overview, and I really urge you to find a copy of Neighbors. It's a free publication, by the way. I'm not selling this thing. It's a free publication. If you go to neighborspaper.com, you'll find the article in the media column that I write that has links to Charlie's blogs. They are really rich in information for you. We'll be continuing our conversations all year with various people each month to keep this process going and hopefully helping people to think for themselves, make a better long-term decision and not just focusing on this year or the moment, but in a much larger time frame. So I want to thank you for being here today to help us get started.
Thank you, John.
And we'll continue
Thank you.
again next month, all right?
Great.
Okay.